Record is September 5th, 2023 at 4:30 PM. We'll begin this afternoon's work session with roll call attendance.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilman Overton.
Here.
Councilwoman Pearl.
Here.
Councilman Cavanagh.
Here.
Councilman Borton.
Here.
Councilman Hoagland.
Here.
Mayor Simonson.
Here. Next item up is adoption of the agenda.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Hoagland.
I move the adoption of the agenda as published. Second.
I have a motion and a second to adopt the agenda as published. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the agenda is adopted. Next up is the consent agenda.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Hoagland.
I move that we approve the consent agenda and for the mayor to sign and clerk to attest. Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the consent agenda is agreed to. There were no items moved from the consent agenda, so we will go right into item 21, which is department report from the Idaho Transportation Department regarding Eagle Road State Highway 55 Safety Group Speed Review Recommendation and Discussion. I will turn this over to, okay, it's going to be Dan McElhaney with Idaho Transportation Department. Dan, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. Council members, we appreciate this opportunity to update you on the State Highway 55 Eagle Road Safety Corridor Planning. And today with me, of course, is our district engineer, Caleb Lakey, and I'll just give some opening comments and turn it over to our district engineer. Let's see, what we got for the mouse. Maybe I'll just draw your attention to the handouts in front of you, Mayor and council members. One is called the Scope of Work, which was developed last fall with city and ITD staff and our working group with ISP and other team members. And it just gave an outline of, at least as of December, the background objective and the approach moving ahead to look at speed, crash, and sign data on the corridor from I-84 to State Highway 44 on Eagle Road. The second handout is entitled Speed Limits, which was probably drafted around 2013, 2014, after the 2012 House Bill 619 passed and Idaho Code 49-207 was updated regarding setting speed limits on state highways and city streets. And the third handout is part of the proposal, and it's a engineering drawing of speed limit feedback signs and a advisory speed limit sign, which is Caleb will go through that in the proposal. Well, thank you. Great, thank you. So just an update on the 55 working group is what I'll cover and talk about some of the options that were reviewed, and we'll cover the proposal and benefits for your questions and comments, and talk about the next steps ahead in looking at traffic safety on State Highway 55. The working group consisted of Meridian, Boise, and Eagle staff, Ada County Highway District, Idaho State Police, as well as ITD staff and traffic operations and engineering at the district and headquarters level. We had meetings in the fall and through the winter and developed the safety plan, which is one of your handouts as far as the scope. And we're able to have a couple of updates with David Miles of your team, as well as the mayor, in getting some suggestions and feedback, and the possibility of taking the traffic speed limits to 45 miles an hour from 84 to State Highway 44. The handout regarding speed limits fact sheet is summarized here as well from Idaho Code 49-207. And you hear a lot about the 85th percentile of free-flowing traffic. Well, that's a guidance at the federal level as well for traffic engineering, is to consider free-flowing traffic versus the posted speed limit, and posted speed limits cannot be set arbitrarily is the guidance. That this helps determine a safe and a reasonable speed as determined by a vast majority of the drivers based on the highway conditions drivers are experiencing. So during a speed study review, you're taking a look at free-flowing traffic queues, particularly during the AM and PM peak hours, morning and evening. And we're looking to avoid speed variance between vehicles where drivers may be driving for conditions while others may be driving for the posted speed. And that's why the majority of drivers is what the studies are based on. Now, national research has shown fewer accidents using this, this guidance. And based on the review, revising the speed limits is not apparent as we presented at the last meeting. And you asked us to take another look at it from a few different angles, in particular to context-sensitive solutions on the corridor. And the 85th percentile speeds observed during our review during peak hours as well as off-peak hours were below the posted speed limits. And here are the speed zones that we have. The posted speed limit from I-84 to Fairview is 50 miles per hour in the St. Luke's Hospital zone to Fairview. And then Fairview to Boise River North Channel, it's posted at 55 miles an hour. And then at the intersection zone of 55 and 44, it's posted at 40 miles an hour near the river. I'll introduce Caleb Lakey to go through this in more detail and also go through the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Caleb Blakey, District Engineer for District 3, ITD. Just want to continue on with what Dan has shown you here as far as what we've looked at and leading to our recommendation this evening. You might recall from our last presentation, Eagle Road carries over 57,000 vehicles per day. It's certainly a high volume, high mobility corridor for the area. We have a peak hour volume over 4,200 vehicles. So a lot of traffic moving on Eagle Road. And the other thing I want to point out here is projected to be over 73,000 by the year 2040 with the growth rates in the current NPO model. So, you know, we have a lot of traffic today and we expect that not to slow down at all to move forward in the future. So as we consider any options for Eagle Road, we need to consider the balance of what we have today and what we have coming in the future and the role that Eagle Road plays in our valley here. And then just for information, we did run some travel times. We did hire a consultant to go out and collect some speed data and then also some travel times. What you can see here on the screen is what you would expect. Travel times drop a little bit in the morning, they drop pretty significantly in the afternoons, and they pick back up in the evenings. And so the reason I want to emphasize that is we don't have a consistent usage on Eagle Road, meaning throughout all hours of the day. There are peak hours. During those peak hours, we do see congestion. When we have congestion, we do see speeds slow due to the high volume of traffic and all of the merging and diverging movements taking place. But there are periods of time where the road flows very freely and functions very well as a thoroughfare north and south in the valley, which is critical to overall mobility and transportation needs in the valley. As we looked at crash data, the number of crashes, and this is no change from last time, the number of crashes is fairly consistent year over year. We always would like to see less crashes, of course, but the idea that the crashes are consistent tells us there's not some sort of outlying influence taking place on the highway. There's still bad decisions being made, and we will continue to work towards trying to mitigate those. But overall, the number of crashes we see is fairly consistent and relatively low considering the percentage of traffic and the fact that it's a 6-lane highway as a regional arterial road. You know, again, we always would like to see less, but the numbers that we see are not showing us a need to say there's a significant crash problem here. The vast majority of those crashes are at intersections. If the roadway functions with much more limited access, we would reduce a lot of the crashes. And that makes sense as people are slowing to turn or joining traffic or just generally making lane changes. That causes a lot of our crashes. Unfortunately, 31% are distracted driving. That's a continuous campaign in partnership with the law enforcement. And then a small percentage failure to yield. There is a pretty high crash rate down by St. Luke's. There's a high volume there and there's a high crash rate. But the majority of crashes really happens between Franklin and Chinden, and that's our highest volume section as well. So none of that should be surprising. That's what we would expect. And what we found and why I'm emphasizing this to you is what we found in looking at the data confirmed what we have observed generally on the operations of the highway. So, since we last met, what has the city done? The city dedicated staff time to participate in this working group, and we appreciate that. And the city invited us back to meet today, and we've met a couple of times also with the mayor and chief of staff. And we also recommend that moving forward, that the city co-host with ITD maybe an open house or some way to communicate what the plan is for Eagle Road, what that looks like. And so our community members and stakeholder members know what we're working on and what the plan is. ITD action. So we completed a signage review and did some updates. You can see those on the bottom of the screen here. We added these at our mid-block turns. The left turn yield to through, additional placard was added, and the do not block intersections was added for the through movements, the north and south. The third lane widening on Eagle Road was completed, and that was completed through a partnership with the developer, the village. They completed that third lane, but that's been a great enhancement to the corridor overall and helped smoothing some of our traffic. And then most recently, we repaved the whole corridor. And so now you have some, we call it nice black and smooth pavement out there. That came with enhancing the striping, right? Refresh the striping as well. That's been completed. We change ordered into that project a small U-turn loon project at both Ustick and McMillan. So there was observations that some vehicles making a permissive U-turn there would have troubles making that corner, especially if they're in a vehicle any larger than a sedan. And so we bulbed out the pavement slightly on those corners to allow for a smoother movement. And that's important as we talk about the potential to restrict access moving forward. You have to provide an opportunity for those vehicles to turn around and access businesses along the corridor. So those U-turns become really important. And since those U-turns were a modification after the original design of the highway, we further modified it in this last project and have gotten positive feedback about that. The other thing I wanted to highlight is that we did do an enhanced enforcement in September of last year. That was in partnership with ISP. Your PD also participated. I believe Boise Police Department was there, Ada County Sheriff, and did an enhanced enforcement in September. Made 79 traffic stops, majority of them were traffic stops, I should say. There were a couple speeding violations in there, equipment violations, non-moving violations. But again, there was no large overarching or jump off the page at you contributing factor. I did participate in that. I did a ride along with ISP that day just for an hour or so as my schedule permitted, and was able to observe several traffic stops, participated in a couple ourselves. My observation is that the highway largely regulates itself, given the nature of the highway, the sequencing of the signaling along the highway, and the way traffic behaves. In large part, traffic is self-regulating given the capacity of the highway. That does not mean there's not opportunity for drivers to make poor decisions. Just offering that as my observation and being part of this enhanced patrol. So our proposal summary, we evaluated the corridor for traffic speed, travel time, crash information, and did some field reviews. We did consider the mid-block unsignalized left turns and what those, how they're operating and how they could be further modified to operate. Was there opportunity to add more signals? We have 16 signals already. And what would additional signals look like? For example, signalization like we added at the village where you have a signalized left in. What kind of opportunity would that provide? And there's always a trade-off for what that would also do. Again, that goes back to my comment about the U-turns at the current signalizations. Where we've landed, council, and what our recommendation is based on the feedback that we've gotten and what we've observed. We would like to enhance the corridor with watch for stop traffic signs. And I have an example of that behind me here with an advisory 45-mile-an-hour sign placard below that. We would like to enhance these signs further with flashing yellow beacons that would be timed. So in the morning hours, 7 to 9, and in the afternoon, 4 to 6, those lights would be activated, thereby drawing the driver's attention to them and emphasizing the concern of congestion. As I mentioned, the majority of our crashes are happening intersections to kind of alert the drivers to be looking for that. So will that change the speed limit? No, that's not changing the speed limit. However, it's advising the drivers, which is what we've heard and what we've seen is the problem is drivers' expectations on the highway. If I drive it at night and I can drive 55, and then I come out there in congested hour and one lane's moving and one lane's not, what's the expectation of the driver? I like this recommendation because simply changing out a speed limit sign, I believe would have limited impacts to the driver. There's lots of signs out there already, and I bet if you stop most drivers and ask them what signs they passed, they're not going to be able to recite for you what they're seeing on the highway. A sign that's adaptive to some degree, that's not always flashing, but can flash, and we can modify that further, does tend to grab attention further and draw an emphasis to what we're trying to communicate and educate to the drivers. We also would like to install vehicle speed feedback signs on all of our posted speed limit signs for the 55-mile-an-hour zone. So just to give you a little bit better feel for what that means, here's our engineering drawings of what those would look like. You have a copy of that as well. The details there, more detail than you need, but just want to provide you that we have drafted that up as far as installation would go. But probably more pertinent is, what would it look like? Again, I have the sign behind me here for watch for stop traffic. This illustration just shows with the alternating beacons on top. Again, here, I think the big benefit is we talked about and we looked into what does a variable speed zone look like. We steered away from that is because it's very difficult to communicate a variable speed when you don't have say a captive audience, like on a freeway, when you get on a one ramp and you're going to be going the same direction for several miles with the same group of people, you can communicate, hey, the speed for the next 5 miles is X. On a road like Eagle Road, where you have so many opportunities to get on and off, it'd be very, very difficult to communicate effectively a variable speed. However, something like this, where we can make it adaptive to say, hey, there are certain times of the day that there was value to that idea of a variable speed. There are certain times of the day when we want you to really pay attention for stop traffic, and we're recommending that you slow down. I think this is a really good approach to do that. And then, as I mentioned, the speed feedback signs, you've seen these, but we'd like to enhance the speed zone with these on our current 55-mile-an-hour zones. Thank you. So just to give you a general idea of what we're proposing, as I've described it, and this is not an exact drawing of what we intend to do, but gives you a feel. The blue dots represent the watch for stop traffic signs. The red dots represent where we would install the feedback signs. Predominantly between Franklin and McMillan, we would install the watch for stop traffic on both sides of the highway. Again, with those zones in the morning hours and evening hours, those can be adapted or enhanced. And then the 55-mile-an-hour zones with the feedback signs as well. So, the exact location of these, we can work further on what exactly those look like. I just want to kind of give you a feel of what we thought that could look like and the benefits that would bring. So again, benefits are enhances driver awareness and safety. A sign that's adaptive or active is going to grab their attention more than a static sign. It's adaptable as traffic conditions warrant. So as I started with, we expect to see continued growth on Eagle Road. That's not a surprise to anyone. This won't be the last time we're going to have to consider what Eagle Road looks like. These signs can be adaptive as that goes to extend the hours, modify the hours, etc. We believe that those feedback signs and advisory signs will have mobility and operational benefits to the users on Highway 55. And safety emphasis will have higher visibility, and the corridor will be monitored by ACHD, ISP, and ITD. So as we install these, we can continue to monitor them and see if it's making a difference. Is it having an impact on the behavior of the drivers? So as far as next steps go, certainly if you have any suggestions or requests from today, we can consider those and provide a summary by the middle of next month. We have an ongoing signal retiming project with ACHD that will continue as far as the coordination of the signals. In addition to that, ITD and ACHD are meeting in late September to review this current signal timing and travel speeds on the corridor, as well as other corridors in Ada County. We can work with the working group to develop our final details on the proposal, and then we'd like to update the Idaho Transportation Board later this fall on the current status of the corridor. So, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, that is our recommendation, our proposal to you, and our report back on the speeds and information we looked at since we last met. And Mr. McElhenney and I would certainly stand for any questions or comments you may have.
Thank you, Dan and Caleb. Council, they've heard enough from me, so I'm going to turn this over to you for the conversation. Councilwoman Perot.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. I'm encouraged by what I heard today. I think this is very well thought out. The question I have is just what interaction that you've had with the business owners, property owners along 55, just how they've been involved in the process. what feedback you've gotten from them, if it's been helpful, and if there's any concerns that the minimization of left-hand turns and the slowing will cause traffic to start utilizing parking lots as cut-throughs and things like that.
Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman, I have not had any engagement with the business partners on modification. We've heard some anecdotal feedback. If we like to engage the partners, we'd like to work that through the city as far as the businesses go. To your question, a couple thoughts I have. You know, there's always concern of cut through traffic. That's certainly something we would want to consider if we're going to be influencing that. What other options can we provide to encourage traffic to stay on the highway for the U-turn movements, et cetera? And just to be clear, we're not currently proposing to close any mid-block access points. That is an option we could still certainly consider in the future moving forward. That would have big impacts, and that would be something we need to coordinate very closely with the city and the business owners.
For the record, Councilwoman Schrader joined us at 4:35.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Overton,
if I can have a few minutes.
the time is yours.
First off, thank you to ITD and your work group. A tremendous job you've done. But I'm going to give you a little different reality that I have. I've lived here long enough that I remember when Eagle Road was a 2-lane road with a stop sign in Fairview. And I've watched it grow. I've watched the interchange go in. And I've watched as the businesses have come and the houses have gone and shopping centers have gone up. I now represent the district that represents that area from I-84 all the way to the city limits on Eagle Road. And I am consistently hearing the same thing. The speeds need to come down. I was worried about commerce. It's Highway 55. We're worried about vehicles coming through. You gave times of 11 to 16 minutes, 16 to 23 minutes, 10 to 14 minutes, different times of the day. If it was a perfect world and we had 2 cars starting at Chinden and driving 5 miles, basically almost the part of we have in Meridian, 5 miles of Eagle Road, and there were just 2 vehicles on the road, and one of them was going 45 miles an hour and one was going 55 miles an hour, and they had all green lights all the way through, something that would never really happen in the world. The 45-mile-an-hour car would get there in 6 minutes and 40 seconds. The 55-mile-an-hour car would take 5 minutes and 27 seconds. It's a simple math. The difference between those 2 cars is only 1 minute and 13 seconds. As you can tell, I'm a proponent of only having 45 miles an hour, 24 hours a day. We're not affecting commerce. We're not affecting the average driver. If you're telling me that the times are taking 11 to 16 minutes and those other times, then they're obviously not driving 55 miles an hour all the way through this corridor. They're not even driving 45 miles an hour through this corridor. The average vehicle runs just over 4,000 pounds. The average commercial semi empty with a trailer weighs 35,000 pounds. The average commercial semi with a full trailer is 80,000 pounds. We've got to deal with some really big rigs coming down Eagle Road at a 55-mile-an-hour speed limit when we're putting in medium and high density residential and a lot more business that are opening out onto Eagle Road. I think parts of this plan are really good, but I think for simplicity's sake, this must be a 45 only zone. From the city limits, I'd like to say Chinden, but that's outside of our city, but at least from our city limits all the way through to the interstate. We can reduce, because stopping times on vehicles, you have to remember you have reaction time. So, and I know I've got ISP in the house and MPD in the house. And if you don't know, I spent 27.5 years with Meridian Police. So I studied and lived and read this stuff for years. We could have a 25% reduction in the amount of time it takes for a vehicle to stop by simply dropping it by 10 miles an hour. And that doesn't go into the fact that now we've got to talk about the kinetic energy each one of those vehicles has at a higher speed versus a lower speed when we have a collision. My ultimate goal is to see a reduction in accidents, but specifically a reduction in the seriousness of injuries and fatalities. And I think the only way to do that is to not put up temporary signs, not put up another sign that people have got to watch depending on the time of the day, but to simply make this a 45-mile-an-hour road. We are not going to disturb the overall amount of time it takes people to come through our city.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Schrader.
thank you. I apologize for being a bit late, but I was listening in. I agree with Councilman Overton. And I think the piece that's missing for me, and I appreciate that you're looking at things holistically, but it's really the crash severity to me that is a big concern. And that I think is the element that we're trying to address. It's not just, it's really trying to weigh the crash severity from having, 55 miles an hour plus, with people especially exceeding the speed limit. And I think going down to 45 would make a huge difference. I appreciate the thought about the advisory signal. I mean, it is a step in the right direction, but I just don't think it goes far enough. It's my feedback.
Councilman Cavanagh.
And Caleb, nice seeing you. Appreciate you guys being here. I know we may have different resolutions that we would recommend, but one of the things I think is important, I just want to say thanks, is I know you guys are in the business of moving people as efficiently and safely as possible. We're in that same place. It's kind of like we're on a road trip. We've just got different ways that we want to get there. And so that's where some of my questions is coming from, is that you are the engineer. I trust your expertise, but it's kind of the other side of the coin that represents the community. Some of this doesn't land right. And so this is where some of my questions are going to be coming from. You mentioned the significant amount of work that you all did kind of leading up to this. And it looked like that you engaged with other jurisdictions, City of Boise, City of Eagle. So my first question for you is Boise saying 55 makes sense? Is Eagle saying 55 makes sense? Or are they kind of the similar vein of Meridian saying that maybe 55 is too high?
Mayor, Councilman. So yes, Boise and Eagle were on that working committee with us. There was no consensus of, yes, it has to drop to 45. They would be supportive of that, but they have different objectives. They don't have the highway. They don't have the majority of the highway like you do in Meridian, right? So Eagle's perspective is, hey, we're kind of at the end of the line. Now, they did not make any, overt, hey, we want to keep it as high as possible to get to Eagle as fast as possible. That was never said or implied at all. But their perspective was a little bit different. And then Boise, obviously, they're pretty removed as well. Boise, in the conversations we had, talked about sidewalk connectivity. There was talks about peds and bikes. And we actually had, as a result of the input from both Boise and Eagle, expanded our, when we do our kind of our safety look at crashes, right? We literally draw a polygon around the area and it queries all the data. We expand that out about a quarter mile each side of Eagle Road to capture any, what you might call ancillary accidents. And we were still unable to find any sort of uptick of, ancillary pedestrian or bicycle related accidents that were occurring because of Eagle Road or proximity, even trying to make the connectivity that, hey, because they were a quarter mile off, maybe they're headed to Eagle Road, et cetera. We didn't see that. So again, I think overall Eagle and Boise will go along with whatever's decided and would be supportive of what Meridian is saying. But they also were not coming out and saying this is a must have.
Sure.
From what I heard.
I appreciate that. So, Mr. Mayor, a couple more questions if I may.
Time's yours.
Caleb, my next round of questions kind of deals with this advisory speed limit. And you'll have to forgive me. That was something that when I was reading through this stuff, I was like, now what's that? And you actually kind of confirmed my concern about it when you were talking about the amount of signs on Eagle Road and how overwhelming it can be. And so maybe can you present to the council, where are these advisory traffic or speed limits being posted, and what has been the impact, positive or negative, of them being placed? Because again, as just a driver, that would be really confusing to me, that I drive for a little bit and I see 55, and then I see a yellow sign that says 45, and trying to figure out what my speed limit is. Someone who wants to follow the law, it can be confusing.
Certainly. Yeah. So the best example I can give you to illustrate where we typically use advisory speeds is on curves. So you're on a highway and the speed limit, let's use 55 miles an hour. And you're coming up on a curve that's not necessarily speed rated for 55 miles an hour. We would post that at a lower speed to say, we advise you to slow down around this curve, specifically for larger vehicles. So that's where you'd see it most commonly. This application is a bit unique, and we arrived there after considering what a variable speed could look like and how we would implement that. And when we got to a point where we struggled, as I explained earlier, we don't know how we would adequately explain or inform the driver on a regulatory speed, given the nature of Eagle Road. And so we backed off of that. And we said, what else could we do to communicate the same need that, hey, there's certain times of the day when you should pay closer attention to potential for a road hazard. And we arrived at this idea of posting an advisory speed. So advisory speed does not change the regulatory speed. Regulatory speeds are black on white signs. Those are ones that you can write a ticket against that for speeding. However, an advisory speed is a recommended speed that says there's some sort of road hazard that you should be considering as a driver. And although you might not write a citation against it for speeding, there's certainly still opportunity for saying, hey, you're not driving for conditions as recommended on the highway. To your question about sign clutter, that's always an ongoing battle. I think the light package would enhance that, but there may be opportunity to remove some more signage. That's a conversation we've had with several communities of, what signs could we consolidate or remove to emphasize the ones that mean the most to us. Everybody wants a sign, especially on a frontage like your road. Businesses want frontage signs along there. It's an ongoing challenge. You have a valid point about how these signs stick out different from the other ones. And the educational part of this, I think, is very valid as well. And hence my comment about potential for maybe an open house or community outreach to say, look, here's what this means and here's why we're doing it. This is driven from not so much a desire to enforce the speed limit. That was never our motivating desire. It was always to educate drivers and improve safety. So the idea that the sign technically is not the regulatory speed, I'm not so wound up about. It's the idea that we're communicating to the drivers of, hey, here's the speed you should be driving, and we're going to try and emphasize that to you.
And I think, Caleb, that's where I come from, is because I think we're on the same page. But I worry that this is going just to add additional confusion on an already kind of busy road for our drivers. Caleb, Dan, my last question for you is, and I pose this question, we have people before us when I'm struggling to kind of see through the same set of eyes that you all have. And so it's kind of a simple question, but it helps me see through your expertise. How does our community benefit by keeping 55 miles per hour on Eagle Road?
Councilman, I would answer that question by saying there are times when you can drive 55 miles an hour on that road, no problem. There's no reason not to. And to Councilman's excellent descriptor earlier, there's times when you cannot. The road is already self-regulating. So if we were to change the speed limit arbitrarily down to 45 miles an hour to try and better match what we see during some peak hour concentrations or congestion hours, why is it that a driver at 9 o'clock at night can only drive 45 miles an hour? Why can't they drive 55 miles an hour? The road's designed for it. The road's built for it. There's no reason, there's no obstruction why they shouldn't be. So we're putting a driver in a situation where there's no reason why they can't. The data says they should be able to, but we're arbitrarily restricting them down and putting them in a position where they're going to be potentially in violation of the law by driving a speed that's reasonable and safe otherwise. So to me, that's the benefit. I guess I might even flip the question, Councilman, and say, what's the benefit of dropping the speed? If the cars are already traveling that speed on their own, they're self-regulating due to traffic signals and congestion, what good does 45 mile an hour post? We're not changing anything.
I would love to buy you a cheeseburger and have that conversation and not have to have everybody saying that, because I have some strong feelings about that. And I go back to, we have a ranch in Montana. I remember when Montana did away with speed limits, right? You're driving down the interstate and the speed limit was, remember, it's reasonable and prudent, except for at night. Oh, but the roadway can handle that type of traffic capacity, but they slowed cars down at night because there are things that sometimes drivers can't see at night, which is, I would almost reply back to your question when you're talking about just because the roadway is designed to handle speeds, it doesn't always mean that those are reasonable and prudent speeds for people to be driving. So appreciate the insight, appreciate the education. For what it's worth, I'm in support of all of your recommendations but one, and I appreciate the thought and consideration that you brought to us today.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Hoagland.
Yeah, Caleb, I need a layman's approach and understanding to this. I don't have the expertise, experience Councilman Overton has. So when I hear you talk about the 85th percentile, and okay, that makes sense to me because we've all had that experience, like on the freeway, someone's going way below the speed limit, cars zooming by. I mean, that's a hazard. Get that. People going way too fast, that's a hazard. So, okay, the 85th percentile makes sense. And then when I looked at the chart you had up there, and it's 50 miles up here by St. Luke's, then it's 55, and then 40 at Eagle. I think, okay, this is the same stretch of highway. And then the majority of the crashes are between Franklin and Chinden, which is the 55. So I get all this data and then I try to make sense of it and I'm a little confused. So can you walk me through that 55 corridor majority of crashes, 85th percentile? When I'm looking at the same stretch of the road, there must be differences, but I don't have much clarity mentally on that. So walk me through that if you could.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, I think the clearest point I would point to, the clearest indicator would be that on both ends, the highway is essentially ending, right? You have a major point with the freeway on the south and you have Highway 44 on the north. And so the idea that speed limits are dropping is not because you're entering the city limits of Eagle, and it's not because you're leaving the city limits to the south, and not even leaving the city limits to the south. It's that you're coming to a major decision point, right? Traffic headed north Eagle Road, for the most part, is going to turn left or turn right and head east or west on 44. Same thing headed south. They're going to, for the most part, turn left or turn right on I-84. So the fact that the majority of the traffic is making some diverging movement is a large part of why the speed limits have been modified on both the north and the south end. Now, there was some crash data on both the north and the south end that influenced those decisions that were made several years ago. But I guess back to your full circle to your question, if there was a speed limit for 55, it would be 55 miles an hour. There's been modifications made on both the north and the south end. So it wasn't so much that we went through and set individual speed limits as we went. It was, there was a speed limit and there were modifications made on both the north and the south end after the fact.
Councilman Borton, I saw you on mute a few minutes ago. Are you?
The comment was made that there wasn't consensus amongst, perhaps it was the electeds on this issue. So my question to you is, what if there was? If you had consensus from the electeds that this should be 45, would that drive your decision?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, council member. I appreciate that question. This is Dan McElhinney. I'm the Chief Deputy Director for ITD Chief of Operations. We do get great feedback from our stakeholders, our cities, our counties, in guiding us, but we're also guided by that Idaho Code 49207, which is also federal highways guidance on the 85th percentile. So from a traffic engineering perspective, we've got to evaluate free-flowing traffic as the guidance goes, and what is the majority of the drivers, their experience, and many of them are experienced. Some are new drivers on that route every day on a 4- and 6-lane highway. Most of 55 for that stretch is now 6 lanes and 55,000 vehicles a day. And Councilmember Overton, I mean, that volume has probably doubled in the last 15, 20 years. So they're experiencing that during congestion, and their average speeds are about 45 to 48. And during off-peak hours, it's 56 to 58. So that majority experience drives the evaluation of the speed limit. What's really good about this proposal is we're going to do our best, and these are going to be very visible, and it's a great opportunity for us, teaming with the city and all of our partners on the corridor, for a safety corridor. And there's no stronger message than a couple of flashing beacons at key points, as the district engineer Caleb has presented, to draw hopefully improved driver behavior that helps reduce those crashes. And many of them are vehicle damage only crashes. And some, unfortunately, some are very serious crashes. So if we were able to arbitrarily change signs as a community, we may not get as much effect as putting this proposal in place, because drivers are going to notice. As we went through our reviews, even our team members originally said, well, what's the posted speed limit? A lot of drivers don't think about that in a congested area. So this is a great opportunity to really help change driver behavior, and we'll see those speeds drop.
Mr. Mayor, a follow-up.
Councilman Borton.
Just some reaction to it. You use the word arbitrary. That's probably the wrong word choice. I think some of the individuals behind you and some of the comments you've heard from electeds, our concern is anything but arbitrary. And candidly, it sounds like it really is some analysis of an efficient number, an acceptable number of crashes and deaths. And that's really the figure that we're willing to accept what's occurring right now. It's, quote, not bad enough. And when I look at the metrics presented, I don't know if there's a number of people that would die turning left on Eagle Road that would be high enough in your calculations to address this in its entire route. So I share the concerns of my council members on the decision. It's frustrating, and it sounds like the electeds through whose city the road goes really don't have any weight to the decision, unfortunately. So I take issue with arbitrary. I don't think our concern is arbitrary and our ask is arbitrary. And I respectfully take issue with this concept that there's an acceptable number of crashes and deaths on Eagle Road that warrant keeping the status quo at 55.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Councilmember. We are right with you on that, Councilmember. We are not happy with the number of crashes on Eagle Road. I use the wording from, and maybe don't have the fact sheet yet in front of you, but from Idaho Code 4927, guiding us not to set it from an engineering perspective arbitrarily. And I was not describing the council or our stakeholders' approach to this. So we want to get there as well. This proposal for advisory speed, most drivers are already doing a great job on speed limits, as the speed study shows, and that's the 85th percentile. And the opportunity to give them guidance during congested times to address that higher crash zone with the advisory speed of 45. It's just a great opportunity for all of us to affect safety. That's my encouragement. I really appreciate you, Mayor and council members. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, just one final question. Do you think that the way Idaho Code is written unfairly handcuffs your ability to address the concern in a way that you wish you could, but you're unable to do so because of those constraints?
Mr. Mayor and Councilman Borton, well, it is probably based on the federal highway guidance for highways and the national traffic manual, uniform traffic control devices, and national guidance on traffic engineering. So it's not just here at the state level, but it is based on that national perspective. Nationally, we have been given at least some support in being sure to balance the context sensitivity and knowing it's not just the engineering and the education of our drivers, but the enforcement and the environment overall on the corridor, which actually helps us come to this proposal and justify the investment in making a change on the corridor. And sometimes in traffic operations, you have to take very positive support from your city councils, from your mayors, and deliver results that try to address the driver behavior on the corridor. And this has a great chance of doing that, maybe even a greater chance than just changing the signs. At least that's the team's proposal. But great question. Thank you.
Mayor?
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Pro.
You had mentioned earlier in the presentation that about 75% of the crashes are at intersections. Did I understand that correctly? So given that that's the majority, do you track what the average speed limit is of the vehicles at the time of the crash and how that's related to, it sounds to me like, if I'm understanding correctly, and I apologize if this is really simplified, but that speed is not necessarily the primary factor in the crashes. So help me connect the dots between that understanding and the conversation we're having. And I apologize that that's a real simple question, but I just want to make sure I'm clear on what I'm hearing.
Mr. Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman, great question. And if I speak out of turn, certainly law enforcement can come correct me on how this is done on police reports, but on any crash report done to the police, there is contributing factors to that, to cause that accident. And speed is one of those things that can be a contributing factor. The data pulled for 55, speed is not the predominant contributing factor for crashes. Following too close, distracted driving, impairment. So again, if that was different, if speed was the largest contributing factor, I think it'd be changing this conversation. The fact that when we looked at the crash data, and there are crashes, they are happening predominantly at intersections, but people are falling too close, they're distracted, or they're impaired. I don't know that points a gun at the speed limit for being the causation of those factors. Now, to the comment made earlier, speed does play a factor in severity of crashes, but it's very difficult to draw a linear line between less speed equals less severity. In general, you can, but it's not necessarily a one-to-one on what that's going to be, unfortunately. So I hope that helps answer the question as to do we track it discreetly? No, but as we look at crashes and look at what causes them, yes, it's part of the report we look at.
Mr. Mayor, a follow-up.
Could we, you mind if we throw that a little to our police department as part of the follow-up to maybe get their perspective on the impacts of speed on the crashes, as they are currently the ones who are enjoying all the work created by the traffic?
Mayor, just to follow up on that, I don't have the exact data. I'd have to do some follow-up on it. But we do, anytime we investigate a crash, we do put in the contributing factors that we can determine based off of the interviews. Sometimes it's multiple. It could be following too closely and speed. It could be distracted driving and speed. So it's not just usually one. There's usually multiple from time to time. But at times there is just one. But to get that data, I'd have to follow up with you guys and provide that data, which I'm sure our CAU team could come up with.
Councilwoman Pro.
Thank you. So of the proposals that were made, I didn't really see anything specific in regard to signage or recommendations for the issues specifically at intersections. And I don't know if there are any possible, changes that can be made to folks following closely. That's, I mean, everyone knows you don't follow closely. I don't know what else you can do. That's just, or the distracted driving, there's already significant efforts being made to that. So were there any additional conversations by this group to address those two things or two or three things that are causing the intersection accidents?
Mayor, Councilwoman, there was quite a bit of discussion about what else do we do, and as you pointed out, the answer was kind of like, what else can we do at the intersections to try and emphasize that, to educate that more. Overall, from a corridor perspective, there could be efforts made to further restrict access along the corridor. If you remove access, you can remove those movements. People are slowing to turn in. If you remove that, you're going to remove the opportunity to have the rear end crash or whatever may be happening there. There's a balance there, right? We've created a corridor that has a lot of access, a lot of commerce going on. I don't think we have the opportunity to go back now and say, well, this is a restricted access corridor like we would on a freeway or like the intent is on the new Highway 16, right? So that ship has sailed in some regards as far as completely restricting access. Now, could we reduce some access? Yes. And do I think that would have some improvement? Yes. But without being able to make a wholesale change on the whole corridor, it comes down to the kind of this back and forth of how tolerant are we of that and what are really the benefits of doing that. So it's a very difficult question, to be frank.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Overton.
kind of a closing comment I didn't say the first time. Back before the center medians were on Eagle Road, Mayor Tammy DeVere asked me, who was the lead for the police department, to help present information on why we needed to have center medians from I-84 to Franklin Road, the very first ones that were put up. There was a large contingency of people that said no to that. They didn't want to see them. And what I brought to them was something pretty simple. I had 34 injury crashes from vehicles turning left from Magic View Drive onto Eagle Road. The center medians went in and 34 went to 0. We did our job. We took care of our community. We caused them a little bit of inconvenience, but we prevented any more future injury crashes from people turning left. That's all we're talking about today. I'm gonna read this. This is right off National Highway Traffic Safety Administration's website. The extent of crash damage depends upon the amount of energy present, not what the roadway can handle, the vehicles. The faster a vehicle is moving, the more kinetic energy it takes into a crash. The amount of kinetic energy increases greatly with only slight increases in speed. As the amount of energy increases, the chances of a fatality increase. A collision at 60 miles an hour is 50% more likely to result in a fatality than just 45 miles an hour. It's not just a little bit more, it's a lot more. 10 miles an hour, lowering that speed limit doesn't seem like a lot. It's not slowing people down. In the scheme of things, under the times you're talking about, at most, if they had all green lights, it's taking 1 minute and 13 seconds out of their day. My goal, and I think what we hear from other council members, is to try to make our roadway safer for the people that use it. Because we got a lot of drivers and a lot of human error that cause most of our accidents. We can't do anything about the human error. Back in the days when they used to teach us accident investigation, you remember it was the 3 E's. It was engineering, education, and enforcement. And the least effective was enforcement. The number one most effective thing we could do to those roadways was our engineering and how we set the roadways up and how we built them. Education was number 2. It's still that way today. The number one thing we can do is not put more cops on Eagle Road trying to write tickets, not put up more signs advising them they should slow down. It's changing that speed limit and making those permanent changes so it's consistent for everyone. I believe that from my heart. I always have. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, Councilman, again, I really appreciate your insights and your sincerity. Absolutely. Couple thoughts. If council's proposing modifying access, that's a conversation that can continue about restricting further access on Eagle Road. We were focused today on speed limit question, so that's something else that can be followed up on. But the other thing is, when we talk about the enforcement, if we change a sign, and to use the words we used earlier, arbitrarily, meaning we just pick a number, not to trying to dismiss the concern, but pick a number that doesn't make sense to the driver, he or she's not going to adhere to the speed limit unless we continually enforce it, which starts this vicious cycle of where we don't really want to be. We want the road, for the most part, to be self-regulating. So again, I go back to the comment I made earlier to Councilman here about, if the road already is, traffic's already slow, we see that in numbers we have already. I don't know what we're changing with the speed limit. People are already traveling that speed. So we're putting up a sign and asking law enforcement to enforce it when people are already driving that speed when they are being regulated by congestion.
Yeah, and
I don't want to go back and forth on this. I wasn't talking about restricting access. When Overland Road was first completed and it was made 5 lanes, and it was the smoothest new blacktop in the city of Meridian, and ACHD had just completed it, we had vehicles going 75 miles an hour down there because it was the neatest, slickest roadway in the city, and the roadway handled it just fine, but it was 40 and they got tickets. I'm really not interested in what the roadway can handle. It's human error that's the factor for these crashes, not what the roadway can handle. And now we have more distractions in vehicles than we ever had before, with navigation systems and cell phones and map programs. So when we had a 1.5 second delay for people's reactions before they ever could start applying their brakes, and we have the braking distance plus the reaction time, I believe it's probably even greater today than it was back then. So I absolutely fault on the side of trying to figure out the safest way. It's also still a way we can move traffic quickly through the city. I don't think you're going to see a slowdown in vehicles moving through the city of Meridian by making that change. I also don't like to just try to confuse them with a sign that's advisory only, because it doesn't give our law enforcement teams any opportunity other than to watch people ignore it and continue to drive 55 miles an hour. But then you'll have some people that will take it under advisement and drive 45 miles an hour. And now I got two different groups of people, some driving 55 and some driving 45. Because some people are looking at your signs and some people are taking it under advisement and others are just flat ignoring it. I think it's going to cause confusion.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Scher.
I actually think just in the interest of making sure you have good feedback, I would be open to us doing like a voice vote just on our opinion about whether it should be 45 miles an hour. And I feel like that would provide a lot of clarity to you so you could understand where the majority of the council is. So I am in favor of it being 45 miles an hour, full stop.
And I'd be happy to do that. I've been holding you guys got me riled up a little bit. So I want to get some things on the record first, just for clarity. And then I'd be happy to throw it up to a voice vote if that's what council would like to do. Just so we're clear, I want to start with where Councilman Overton talked about, I look at that corridor and the city of Meridian has done more than, in my opinion, than any other city has done to improve safety along the corridor. I get really frustrated when I look down at the city of Eagle, which has no center medians, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is you modified a speed zone by moving a speed limit sign from one location to another because of concerns over access around the river, which again is during the day, not at night. So the city that has taken the least amount of interest in preserving safety along the corridor actually gets better treatment towards speed reductions in that area compared to ourselves. The most problems we have are up near the interstate currently, which you've not reduced down to an adequate level. At least from my perspective, my conversation was reduce whatever the speed limit, whatever the sign currently says, reduce that sign down 10 miles. So 55 doesn't start till you get to the village. So from my perspective, 45 from the village, 40 further back, working your way up to the interstate. It was never about, at least from my perspective, leaving it at 45 because that doesn't even address the place where you're currently having some of the biggest problems with crashes. You're basically saying, yeah, let's leave it at 45 at that location. So just so we're clear, my perspective has been reduce whatever the current sign is down 10 miles an hour along the corridor through Meridian. And yes, elected officials, at least the mayor, will be 100% supportive in the city of Boise. I can't speak to the council in that regards. They have no concerns from that standpoint. So at least you understand the council has heard what I've tried to advocate for in the conversations. I wasn't on my office was represented and that hopefully was clearly conveyed in terms of what we were trying to achieve. But we have been the most proactive city when it comes to safety along this corridor. We've had limitations put in development applications. We've tried to be good partners. The conversations that I've had over and over of talking about, what is our community expectations? We talk the same, going back to the same thing, school zones. Those roads can drive 45 miles per hour, but we allow them to be reduced during the day despite how well they can drive in that regard. That is, a great example. And I've had these conversations with members of our Transportation Commission who are engineers who work for ITD. Sometimes you just set a standard that is what your community expects and values, and you do it. And I know the state law changed. We're in after the state law. You're handcuffed to a certain extent. But I think this is just one of those things that we'll continue to have to work with the state legislature so we can try to have an ability to have a reasonable speed limit through our city along these roadways. Just so you know, I've already started getting people complaining about Chinden speed. Now that we've got this nice, beautiful road that's 55 along Chinden right now? Yep. Guess what? Complaints are coming in about the speed and the turning movements that are there. And that's even less limited of a turn area than what you have or access on Eagle in that regards. We want to be good community partners. We see the same thing on, Highway 69 in terms of a reduction as you get down into those choke points from that standpoint. The hospital is a very unique animal, but there doesn't seem to be no one seems to care in that regards about the access, the amount of lights which are tripped on a continuous basis that impact turning movements and speeds. And you know, we all could be engineers when we drive and we understand how we see, but you know, the faster you go on the road, the more likely you think you can make that light before it turns red in a permissive state. And then what happens? They call our office to complain about people running red lights, whether it was legal or not. And there's very limited enforcement that we can do in those situations. And feedback signs on a 3-lane road, come on. Who's going to know who that speed limit, who that radar is touching for their number in that regard, with how congested it really is. Maybe that's great for at night when no one's on the road and you want to see how fast, you know, let me see how good my speedometer really is. It's really not going to provide any realistic information to 3 lanes of traffic traveling north through the city in that regard. It's no different than when you drive down the interstate and you're in a construction zone and they got a sign there and you're like, oh, is that me? Is that not me? And there's only 2 lanes of traffic in that regard. So I appreciate our dialogue. I appreciate you coming here and presenting. Unfortunately, I've never seen someone work so hard to leave the speed limit the way it is over the last 18 months. That's my honest feedback on this, is that I feel like that's what this has been, is how do we do something without actually doing anything to meet the community expectations? And you guys, you know, I love you. I love our conversations and our dialogue and our intellectual conversations, not over burgers, but in meetings in that regards. But it's seriously disappointing from my perspective that this is where we are today and the outcomes that we are trying to maintain. Even if you are hamstrung by the state law, I wish that I know it can't be done. The ITD would stand up to the legislature and sometimes understand what communities need and want are different than what the state law is. And if you agree with it, that's a different story. Then we'll have different conversations. But I know where your hamstrings have been in our dialogue. So thank you for letting me rant for a few minutes, but I felt like it was something I needed to at least get on the record. If there's anything you want to reply back to, go ahead. Otherwise, I don't have any expectations because these are our conversations.
Well, we appreciate you, Mayor. Thank you. You've been right in there helping guide us, and we all have the same goal. And I know as a mayor and council members too, we want safety on 55. So we got some great feedback, and we've committed in our PowerPoint to give an update by October 15th, at least in a summary from Caleb. But we'll work closely with your staff, and we're going to take another look at a few things. So I commit to that for us as ITD. Thank you.
Thank you. So per council administrator, by a show of hands, is there a preference for 40, a maximum speed limit of 45 along the corridor from the council?
Yes.
And so at least 5 out of the 6, that would be the preference from that standpoint. They're 40 to 45. I think it's 40. Is it 45 when you get off the interstate right there? Or is it 50? It's at 50 right when you get off. So yeah, 40 to 45 would be my hope. So.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Pro.
Thank you. I just want to clarify why I didn't raise my hand. It's not because I'm a no. This is, you know, I only know what you've presented to me. I'm not an expert in this capacity and feel a little bit out of my element with this kind of decision. My preference for me, what feels comfortable to me is for us to implement the proposals that have already been made and then take it in more of like a step-by-step. Okay, if that's not working, we assess it for so many months and then we maybe that was my understanding of how the committee wanted to move through this process, that it would be, we would sort of test things out until we found you know, solutions that are more workable. And so that's, I just want to clarify that I am not a no. If the state decides to change those and lower those speed limits, I'm 100% okay with that. But I feel like it would be more comfortable to kind of go through the process that was already proposed, which is to just kind of implement some things. Let's test it, implement more things. Let's test it. That's what my preference is. And maybe, and I don't want to speak for my fellow council, maybe that's also what they have in mind. And they're just saying, hey, our end result expects this. not that they're suggesting a different route that you take to get there. They can clarify that and not me. But I just, I'd like to see a real, I'd just like to go through this really methodically. At the same time, I agree with the mayor that it is highly, what's the word? Disappointing is not even a strong enough word, that a city can't have more say and influence in these decisions in their own city. I mean, it's bothering to me that there isn't an opportunity to do any more than what we've been able to do, and that there isn't more ability to have some control over that.
Mayor, if I may, Mayor and Council Member again, Dan McElhenney. A couple of the ideas. I think we mentioned earlier that in traffic operations, traffic engineering, to be able to step into a new driver behavior like this proposal could get us to that next step. If we could see speeds begin to drop, that helps that 85th percentile study adjust. So that thinking is smart, and it also helps us address the overall federal and highway guidance and state law as well. But also Idaho Code 49207 allows cities to also initiate, independent speed surveys based on the 85th percentile. I think the working group thought about that as well, knowing that you collect the speed data and it kind of tends to be what it is. We will have, and we mentioned it in the presentation, we do have a couple of teams with ACHD, a couple of opportunities for signal timing and signal synchronization, which also will address travel speed. So when we were thinking about, well, if we can get to a point where we all agree, let's at least implement this first step, knowing that it may take us some time on the signal synchronization, which potentially travels, speed limits may be part of that equation as well. That'll help us overall on the traffic engineering side. So just to try to, and I think I reminded you of that a while back, Mary may have not remembered that, but to step through some of this could really help us as safety leaders for the corridor.
Trust me, I just, if we do the speed study, because you guys pretty much handcuff how we can do the speed, we still have to do it with your standards, but we could put officers on every corner at night and run our lights. And I think that would slow people down along the corridor, and we could get a better result for the speed study. So it might take a little bit more resources, but we can be very ingenuitive in how we reduce people's speed on the corridor when we conduct the speed study. So food for thought.
Mayor, follow-up question.
Yes, we will pay overtime for that.
With Eagle, the chief is I believe listening in and wanted me to ask a question, but with Eagle Road being a state highway, is ISP prepared to handle enforcement of that roadway with it being a state highway?
We'd welcome ISP's comments on that if they would like to. And I did mention it to the sheriff today as well, just in case. If you can wait till you get to the microphone.
Tyler Jussel, Lieutenant, Idaho State Police District Patrol, Mayor, council members. No, our staffing is limited. That would, District 3 patrol patrols 10 counties on this side of the state. We have approximately 40 troopers that do that, including supervisors as well. So adding Eagle Road would be a big burden.
Thank you. The governor's office is also aware that that could be an ITD burden in the future if we can maintain the speed limit.
May I, Mayor?
Yes, you may.
Mayor, and council members, don't give up on the 3 E's, as Councilmember Overton reminded us: education, engineering, and enforcement. All those 3 come together, and it's so important for us working together with the Office of Highway Safety and providing that enforcement factor. So I don't want you to forget about the importance of that. Thank you.
We don't, but and it goes back to maybe you need to look at how you can engineer the road down to a lower speed limit, which you can. You put up some vertical barriers along the roadway, and all of a sudden you get people going slower in certain areas. You can influence the speed on this road if you want to influence it through your engineering. We could influence it with more enforcement from ISP being there, doing a lot more work. You know, state law does give this authority to the sheriff through the state police. It's not a city responsibility to enforce on this road. So ISP or the state thinks that the 3 E's are that valuable. You have the ability to control all three E's. It is your roadway. As we are made abundantly clear through the state law and you have your hands strung and so do we. So I encourage you to take a hard look at all 3 E's from the state's level. Because yeah, you can reduce the speed if you'd like to, put up more things. ACHD said the same thing to us about other roads that they built out that they now are talking about going back and putting in some mechanisms to reduce the speed through engineering efforts. So food for thought. Council, anything else? All right, thank you. With that, we'll go on to item 22, which is the Compensation Committee, General Employee Salary Administrative Guidelines. Turn this over to Christina.
Mayor and Council, thank you for having me this evening. I'm up here on behalf of the Compensation Committee to talk with you about phase 2 of the General Employee Compensation Plan. So as you hopefully have seen, there was an email that went out to all employees outlining what we have been working on the last several years, phase 1 and then also phase 2. Just as a reminder, I want to point out a couple of things. So with this new compensation program that we have implemented for the general employees, some of the goals that we were trying to meet were to increase employee tenure, foster career growth and opportunities, attract top talent, and maintain market competitiveness. So in building these guidelines, building the step plan, which was part of phase 2, and you should have a copy of those guidelines and also frequently asked questions. We feel that adequately meets those goals and will help us maintain a flexible plan going forward. So I am here today to stand for any questions that you might have as we look to roll this out effective October 1st.
Council questions, and Christina kind of she came in late into the committee's efforts, but she's been very integral into the development of these, been connecting with Gallagher and working alongside Todd, who was unfortunately gone this week. I don't know if he planned that or not, but we do have a couple other members of the committee who are present, Lieutenant Coliani, and back here we have Bruce and Lorelei, as well as myself. So sorry, council questions. Councilman Kavner.
You kind of took a little what I was gonna say, so I appreciate that. And Christina, appreciate you jumping in and great to see so many of the committee members. Only question is has there been feedback from employees since that email went out? And what has been kind of the response been?
I have received 2 emails, both positive. Thank you for the work. We know you're doing a lot in the background, is what I've gotten so far.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Schrader.
My only, I guess, question / concern was the CPI year over year as a benchmark to determine the COLA amount that was referenced in the FAQs. That does feel like a departure, at least from the process that the finance department was using with like a 20-year average. So I just wanted to clarify, is it an average or is it a year over year calculation?
I can probably answer that one. We typically do a year over year. He showcased the 20-year average just for information, but we do pull year over year information.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Schrader.
Yeah, that's the only piece that to me, I think we need to just keep in mind, just depending on the economic environment, if those amounts fluctuate wildly. The city is not structured in a way that its revenue side can adjust to wild swings in CPI. So it creates an inherent conflict in future years Just employees need to keep that in mind because this is a program we're putting in place, but it gets appropriated year to year.
And I think the best way to put it, that's the secondary piece of each of this. And it will depend upon the financial ability to meet that, depending on what it may or may not be. A great point for the employees, yes. Council, any other comments or questions? Okay, well, we look forward to implementing this. We'll be going out and sitting down with all the departments. I know as part of the plan is to go a little roadshow and go out and talk to the staff with some of our leadership in that regards and implement this year real soon. So thank you, Christina, and thank you all. I know this has been several years for some people to get to this point, and I just want to say thank you in that regards. Appreciate you all. So Scott, now I think you can officially retire. You said once this happened, you were happy to know.
Thank you, Mayor and Council.
Okay, thank you. Okay, with that, we'll move on to item 23, which is public hearing for a proposed solid waste fee increase. We will open this public hearing with staff comments. Say aye or no, Lorelei, okay.
Mayor and Council, we did not really have anything additional to present, but just refer back to the Public Services presentation. The majority of the increase is the normal allowable per contract increase, so nothing really out of the ordinary this year. The department has received no feedback since the presentation, so open to questions or.
Thank you. Council, any questions for staff? Thank you. This is a public hearing. Mr. Clerk, do we have anybody in the sign up to provide testimony on this item?
Mr. Mayor, we did not.
Okay, is there anybody present who would like to come forward and provide testimony at this time? Or if you're online, if you'd like to use the raise your hand feature. Seeing no one coming forward and no one raising their hand. Council, what's your desire?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Cavanagh?
I'm happy to make a motion that we close the public hearing on item number 23, proposed solid waste fee increase.
Second.
I have a motion second to close the public hearing. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the public hearing is closed. With that, move on to ordinances for the evening. Okay, the first item up is item 24, which is a second reading of ordinance number 23-2023. Ask the clerk to read this ordinance by title.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's an ordinance in accordance with Idaho Code Section 5328, 5329, and 5329A, granting a franchised Idaho Power Company, a corporation, and to its successors and assigns to construct, maintain, and operate in and upon the present and future streets, highways, and other public places within the corporate limits of the city of Meridian, Idaho. Electric utility property and facilities for supplying electricity and electric services to the city, the inhabitants thereof, and others for a term of 10 years, including the non-exclusive right to physically locate and maintain telephone cable, fiber optics, or other communication facilities, setting forth an agreement not to compete, but reserving the power to eminent domain, providing for the payment of franchise fees, specifying other limitations, terms, and conditions governing the exercise of said franchise, and establishing an effective date of November 1, 2023.
Thank you. Council, you've heard this ordinance read by title. Is there anybody that would like it read in its entirety? Hearing none. We will move on to item 25, which is ordinance number 23-2034. Ask the clerk to read this ordinance by title.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's an ordinance of the city of Meridian, Idaho, amending ordinance number 22-1993, the appropriation ordinance for the fiscal year beginning October 1, 2022 and ending September 30th, 2023, fiscal year 2023, by decreasing total appropriations from $219,729,039 to $217,401.08 $217,401,857, increasing total revenues from $136,628,580 to $150,310,494, and decreasing the use of fund balance from $83,095,459 to $66,091,363, and providing an effective date.
Thank you. Council, you've heard this ordinance read by title. Is there anybody that'd like it read in its entirety? If not, do I have a motion?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilwoman Pro.
I move that we approve ordinance number 23-2034, which is amending ordinance number 22-1993.
Second the motion. I have a motion and a second to approve ordinance number 23-2034. Is there any discussion? If not, clerk call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Strater,
Aye.
Overton, Perot,
Aye.
Cavanagh, Borton.
Aye.
Hoagland.
All ayes, motion carries, and the item is agreed to. Next up is item 26, which is ordinance number 23-2035. Ask the clerk to read this ordinance by title.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's an ordinance of the city of Meridian providing for the adoption of a budget and the appropriation of $233,617,299 to defray the necessary expenses and liabilities of the city of Meridian in accordance with the object and purposes and in certain amounts herein specified for the fiscal year beginning of October 1, 2023 and ending September 30th, 2024, to levy all such appropriate taxes and levies as authorized by law upon taxable property, and to collect all authorized revenue, to provide for a waiver of the second and third readings pursuant to Idaho Code Section 5902, and providing for an effective date and the filing of a certified copy of this ordinance with the Secretary of State.
Thank you. Council, you've heard this ordinance read by title. Is there anybody who would like it read in its entirety? If not, do I have a motion?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilwoman Pro.
I move that we approve ordinance number 23-2035.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve ordinance number 23-2035. Is there any discussion? If not, clerk call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Strater,
Aye.
Overton, Perot,
Aye.
Cavanagh, Borton.
Aye.
Hoagland.
Aye. All ayes, motion carries, and the item is agreed to. Next up is item 27, which is ordinance number 23-2036. Ask clerk to read this ordinance by title.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's an ordinance related to Alden Ridge subdivision H 2022-0059, annexing a parcel of land lying in the southwest quarter of section 21, Township 4 North, Range 1 West, Boise Meridian, Ada County, Idaho, more particularly described in Exhibit A, rezoning 24.8 acres of such real property from RUT to R4 zoning districts and R8 zoning district, directing city staff to alter all applicable use and area maps, as well as the official zoning maps and all official maps depicting the boundaries and the zoning districts of the city of Meridian in accordance with this ordinance, providing that copies of this ordinance shall be filed with the Ada County Assessor, the Ada County Treasurer, the Ada County Recorder, and the Idaho State Tax Commission as required by law, repealing conflicting ordinances and providing an effective date.
Thank you, council. You've heard this ordinance read by title. Is there anybody that'd like it read in its entirety? If not, do I have a motion?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilwoman Pro.
I move that we approve ordinance number 23-2036.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to approve ordinance number 23-2036. Is there any discussion? If not, clerk call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Strater,
Aye.
Overton,
Aye.
Perot,
Aye.
Cavanagh,
Aye.
Borton,
Aye.
Hoagland.
All ayes, motion carries, and the item is agreed to. Next up is item 28, which is ordinance number 23-2033. Ask the clerk to read this ordinance by title.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's an ordinance related to Newkirk neighborhood, H 2022-0088, annexing the east half of the southwest quarter of Section 10, Township 3 North, Range 1 West, Boise Meridian, Ada County, City of Meridian, Ada County, Idaho, more particularly described in Exhibit A, rezoning 22.66 acres of such real property from RUT to TNR zoning district, directing all city staff to alter all applicable use and area maps, as well as the official zoning maps and all official maps depicting the boundaries and the zoning districts of the city of Meridian in accordance with this ordinance, providing that copies of this ordinance shall be filed with the Ada County Assessor, the Ada County Treasurer, the Ada County Recorder, and the Idaho State Tax Commission as required by law, repealing conflicting ordinances and providing an effective date.
Thank you, council. You've heard this ordinance read by title. Is there anybody who would like it read in its entirety? If not, do I have a motion?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilwoman Pro.
move that we approve ordinance number 23-2033.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to approve ordinance number 23-2033. Is there any discussion? If not, clerk call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Strater.
Aye.
Overton. Perot.
Aye.
Cavanagh.
Hey.
Borton.
Aye.
Hoagland.
Aye.
All ayes, motion carries. The item is agreed to. Next up is item 29.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Hoagland.
I move that we go into executive session per Idaho Code 74-206A1A.
I have a motion and a second to go into executive session. Is there any discussion? If not, clerk call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Strater.
Aye.
Overton. Perot.
Aye.
Cavanagh.
Aye.
Borton.
Aye.
Aye.
All ayes, motion carries. So we'll move into executive session.